Episode 292, Heatwaves, Top and Bottom. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Quote, record-breaking heat waves, both Antarctica and Arctic, simultaneously this week, with temperatures reaching 47 degrees C and 30 degrees C higher than normal, end quote. That's a quote from record-smashing heat waves are hitting Antarctica and the Arctic simultaneously. Here's what's driving them and how they'll impact wildlife on the Conversation website. So let's look at those numbers again. 47 and 30 degrees C. That's 116 and 86 F for those who need that number. And those are mind-boggling numbers. The effects at either end of the planet are caused by different phenomena, and the two happening together appear to be a coincidence. Yet climate theory would suggest more of these events are likely. Weather at the poles is connected to the temperate regions that abut them, and to a lesser degree up and down into the tropics, depending on which end you're talking about. Let's begin in the south. There's a lot of ice over land, and that becomes an issue if it drops into the seas. This event is unlikely to cause that, but if these events continue, the effects would be cumulative. Apparently, a high pressure southeast of Australia pumped warm, humid air from the Pacific over the southern continent. At the same time, a low pressure over East Antarctica drew an atmospheric river, and we'll get to that, also onto the continent. An atmospheric river is a narrow band of humid air that carries huge amounts of water vapour and drops it like a river. They tend to carry more water than rivers, but are not common, thankfully, so far. To give you some context of both the size of Antarctica and where Casey Station is, and this will be relevant in a moment, where that is relative to Australia, I dropped a pic in the transcript over at worldorganicnews.com/episode 291. Now to Casey Station, from the same article on The Conversation. Quote, last Monday, that's March 14, air temperatures at the Australian Casey Station reached a maximum of minus 1.9 degrees C. 2 days later, they were like midsummer temperatures, reaching a new March maximum of 5.6 degrees C, which will melt ice. This is the second heatwave at Casey Station in 2 years. In February 2020, Casey hit 9.2 degrees C, followed by a shocking high of 18.3 degrees C on the Antarctic Peninsula, end quote. So that's not good, really not good at all. Now to the northern polar region, from the same article. Quote, a similar weather pattern occurred last week in the Arctic. An intense low pressure system began forming off the northeast coast of the US. An atmospheric river formed at its junction with an adjacent high pressure system. This weather pattern funneled warm air into the Arctic Circle. Svalbard in Norway recorded a new maximum temperature of 3.9 degrees C. US researchers called the low pressure system a bomb cyclone because it formed so rapidly, undergoing the delightfully termed bomb genesis. End quote. Now, far be it from me to suggest US researchers were just being a little bit melodramatic, but the reported weather still causes some questions. Antarctica is heading into winter, so any damage, in inverted commas, to ice flows, sea ice and so on, should be repaired by colder temperatures and smothered with more snow. The northern hemisphere, though, as those of you living there will appreciate, is heading into summer. Sea ice levels are already at lowish levels, and a heat event prior to the warming season is a concern. And this comes on top of last summer's record-breaking rain across Greenland. There's a link to that treat in the show notes. The poles are warming more quickly than the rest of the planet, and these weather systems channeling heat are both the symptom and the mechanism. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, we're in a La Niña weather event here in the South Pacific. More rain for Eastern Australia, less for Western South America, to the point of floods here and droughts there. The worrying thing about the high pressure being south of here during a La Niña is that weather patterns in general appear, from my observations, to have moved south. Once the La Niña fades and we're heading into an El Nino event, those patterns drift northward. A quick explanation of the La Nina-El Nino system might be helpful, as I keep referring to it assuming people know. The temperature of the southern half of the Pacific varies over time. A warmer western Pacific draws weather patterns and rain towards the Australian continent and away from South America. As the warm spot, so to speak, moves eastward, rainfall is drawn towards South America and away from Australia. The millennium drought that started about 1998 and ended for some in 2014, for others in about 2021, and for a tiny minority is still running, was the result of a severe El Nino event for about 10 years. So the scenario is this: the El Nino is on its way back. Weather patterns will drift northward and rain will dissipate. Huge inverted U-shaped troughs have become a feature of summer weather patterns across the Australian continent for at least 5 years now. They were what pumped the hot, dry air from the interior deserts to the east coast to create 45-degree plus heat waves in 2017. And after another 2 summers of these produced the conditions for the 2019-2020 Black Summer fires. We need to get off fossil fuels, as these new patterns will be good for neither Australia nor the Antarctic, nor for that matter anyone else in the world. That's perhaps a little dramatic. I heard the warmer temperatures we've created so far have been positive for some grain growing areas in Canada and Russia, but not by a large margin. Now it seems odd, but during these times of flood up and down the east coast of Australia, this is the time to prepare for the next hot dry spell. Hopefully, and this is truly hope over expectation, these swings from drought to flood and back again will not continue to grow in intensity. I doubt it, but I hope so. The flood events were widespread this year, but follow a series of severe flood events last year that weren't as big, and the Black Summer fire events that were of increasing intensity, size and duration over the past decade. Many people doing small actions can change much, despite the efforts of warmongers and profiteers in the fossil fuel world. It can feel like the entire world, from politics to weather and climate, are out to get us. But as I say, many of us doing small things will have an effect. Plant that garden, protect those trees, protect those tidal swamps, they're now called local wetlands. Find a thing to do. We have been warned since the 1970s at least that the changes in climate were coming, and they're here now. And these changes are a result of excess greenhouse gases from the past. They don't include the extras we're adding daily as a species. It is, I'm afraid, time to stand up. Mitigate the effects as best we can locally, and vote to force change on a local, state and national level, or local, county and national level, or whatever system you have where you live. We were warned that Australia was in the prime spot to feel the early effects of climate change. Don't let the evidence of what we've lived through before you slip away. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. If you'd like to help support the podcast, I have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes and at the website, and all coffees are gratefully accepted. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back next week.